Welcome back to part 2 of episode 95 of the Redacted Culture Cast. We're here joined by Mr. Luke, Southpaw Luke himself, who gets to introduce himself again. Where do people find you as we get started? Where might you be familiar where people go, I recognize that guy?
Southpaw Luke across all the social media platforms. I've been in the firearms industry. I used to work at Modlight, and now I'm freelancing as my own media agency. I'm behind some of the cooler pictures out there on the interwebs, if I do say so myself. But it's an honor to be here. I like to get on and talk about things beyond just the gun with guys like Forrest. So
Thank you very
it's an
much.
honor to be here.
So what initiated the conversation and the main focus of part 1 and what we're going to start off in part 2 is that we were addressing how and I think how we were addressing how gun culture is struggling with the why of the gun, why to
Yeah.
train, why these things, and we were approaching it from a standpoint that the why is a hard question to answer, and so instead of it being that they're struggling with something that one should be easily able to do, rather it's perhaps some of the defining challenge of our day and age. And so
It is.
while we can recognize that we are not easily afforded a quick answer for what the why is, when I say the why, like why do we do what we do? Why do we pursue what we pursue? What are our values? What do we find to be right and true and good? One of the challenges that we run into here is that it's good. Like one of the challenges, I'm sorry, one of the challenges that we're running into is we do have to ask that hard question of why are we doing what we do?
No.
So one of the examples that we've been using is Odysseus from the Odyssey,
Mhm.
Homer's second of a two-part series that we know of. I don't know if there was supposed to be a third. Was Homer into trilogies?
I don't know. That would have been really cool if that comes out. Like they find some scroll in Greece somewhere.
As long as it's not like a Kathleen Kennedy edition where you're like, oh yeah,
uh,
just kidding. Like everything that mattered doesn't matter anymore, and you're like, oh okay, well,
uh, yeah. All the cynics would just say that it's a fake.
it's
Mm.
all yeah, it's a fake. It's not real.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you can't read Greek. How do you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. No, it's very true. So I guess we can kind of dig into when trying to ask this question of why, we have to say, okay, well, there's the who, what, why, when, where, how, right? And all the the how and the who and all of that is fairly simple to answer. Um, but when we ask the question of why, we kind of have to take a step back and say, okay, well, what would be the motivation? What is motivating us to protect tyranny from? Because it's as men, because I guess we can predominantly talk uh, to men. I'm sure the majority of your audience is men. There's kind of
Oh,
this
yeah,
what
by no choice of my own, right? It's
by no
because
choice of your own.
I'm running a platform on the internet which is majority men, about gun culture which is majority men, talking to a guy. So like, all right, cool, we know who we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. Um, so as men, we've got this the whole need to be the whole our natural role as nurture protector, right? Um, and living beyond yourself is, I think, where men find their fulfillment. Um, and we kind of have to answer that question before we can get into any talk of um, the whole idea of rising up against tyranny. But um, being able to answer the question of, okay, well, where as a man, where am I going to find fulfillment? Because that is where you're going to find why. What fills me up gives you your why. Go ahead.
You said you made a statement. It is the natural role of men to be a nurturer and a provider, or a protector and a provider.
Protector. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Where do you get that, and what is the significance
Ah.
of it? Because I can say,
So
because this comes to back to telos.
yeah.
Where do you get that, and how do you
Yeah.
make that argument?
Yeah.
Is this a truth
Yep.
claim, or is this
Um, I think we can see it in natural law that of it's fairly self-evident, right? Go look at um, from on every level, barring aberrations, right? Um, Men are the naturally the aggressive ones. They are the ones physically compared to women, right? But the it's I guess it would be fairly simple to say, like, from a natural perspective, from a natural law perspective, from a simply going off that, you could say that there's I don't even I would be I'm hesitant to say that there's anything beyond that. um
because it's one thing to say that something fits within natural law, and there's another thing to say that that imparts a moral condition to it. Because I can say that we are create or not, I could
this is
say that
true.
it is natural for men to become protectors and providers, but that does
Yep.
not provide the sufficient material to say that that is also
True.
moral or demanded or an imperative.
No. Well, you're not. Okay, so mm, so you don't become a protector or a provider unless you're providing or protecting for something, and typically that happens when you start a family. So you could say the the man with a family is morally obligated, but
Is
in
he
general, everyone else is sitting there with the likely capacity for it,
okay?
to
So
be a protector or provider.
is a man more or less, is an argument that you're making that a man is more or less morally obligated to provide for his family than, say, a woman? Because that's a, I mean,
He's
because we're
definitely set up for it, more than she is. Um, this is this is this is this is going to be a hot button topic, because um, you're what we're asking is now we're starting to get into what are roles, right?
where did they come from? What is the
Where did
origin? What is the motive?
right
How does that, is that real? Is it a
right
solid role? Is it something that's
right
plastic? Is it malleable?
right? Well, it kind of all goes back to, if uh, we have to really go back to you really have to go back to creation and how we man and women were created, right? And say, okay, we were not create the men were not given the same temperaments as women, and women were not given the same temperaments as men. We are more inclined to excel in our perspective areas. Of men tend to be have that they have the testosterone, they have the aggression, they've got the capability for violence, more capability for violence, they've got they have all that going for them. Women tend to have the more nurturing side, right?
So,
And
so
so
the
you could say,
presence of a tendency.
so
Okay.
so we have we can acknowledge, we can, it's fairly simple, just on a ground view. We've been created with uh, these propensities, right? That's not to say that a man can't go nurture, like, right? But it is also uh, okay. So this happen. This will happen a lot. You say you if I say uh, men are more protectors than they are nurturers, and women are more nurturers than they are protectors, right? People go, "What are you saying, that you can't be a single dad and you can't nurture your children?" You're like,
Yeah.
"No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, in general, there is a more propensity, and you're psychologically physiologically more set up for being a provider and protector as a man, and a nurturer and a carer as a female.
You have a disposition towards.
You have a disposition towards it. So, and that comes now. This is where we get into. Uh, okay, you can say, you know, that is, I believe, God given, right? God set this up as a very beautiful complementary system, right? It's not saying that one is higher than the other or one is less, but together they work well together, right? Um, restate the question.
So we're talking. You brought up a statement about natural roles, and then we started
Yeah.
talking about natural roles between men and women, and that is
Yep.
always a landmine when it comes to
It is.
kind of
It is.
articulating what we think about this and what we talk about. It's called, in truth.
Yep.
And in your, you were saying about, well, men have a kind of a proclivity or a disposition towards being capable of violence, being capable of being a protector,
Yep.
and you made it kind of you made a comparison between nurturing versus violence, nurturing versus protecting in this kind of sense. And I do think that it's an interesting sort of semi-binary. I don't want to go full down that road, but
Yep.
what it does product, what I do think about when I look at it is yes and no. Men and women as parents, when you're talking about children, both nurture. In many ways, it's the father that teaches the son compassion because the father can show the son what compassion looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways the mother teaches the son courage. This is just kind of an example because
Yeah.
in a way the courage of the mother is more visible when they challenge, when they on display for the child, and the compassion of the son of the father is more on display. And this is all couched within a telos argument that
Yep.
there is something about the way that men and women exist or are created or came to pass that implies that there is a certain direction they're supposed to take. And then we
Yeah.
talk about complementarianism, which within Christian theology is probably the most nothing burger controversy that I've ever heard. Egalitarianism is just complementarianism without any meaningful content.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally just emptiness. Men and women are equal. Well, okay, men and women are equal what? In every
In
way, shape,
in
or form? You don't live
in
in the real world. You live in a
no,
fantasy.
no.
So
In dignity, yes. In
and dignity and the
capability,
value,
it
complementarianism is a much more fleshed out, thought out, real, understood
yeah.
worldview when it comes to men and women.
Yes.
Egalitarianism is the sort of we're just equal mindset of a 4-year old who's like, oh, we
Yeah.
just get along. It's like, okay, that's not
No.
what peace is.
It's yeah. It's a
So,
very yeah.
and I know
Yeah.
that's an ad hominem and I'm attacking it, but
No,
I think
it is.
egalitarianism is
Totally.
intellectually bankrupt. I think
Totally is.
the but we're kind of digressing. Rather, an argument of it would look like, I think it looks like this. When you talk about nurturing, men and women can nurture in the same way that they nurture relationships with one another.
Yeah.
You're recently married. I'm sure your wife doesn't just want you to be, you know, gun Southpaw Luke all the time. Sometimes,
No.
and
It's a
this is a
it's a small percentage of who I
but
am
when
toward, you know?
it's time, right?
Yes.
However, when it comes to that time, who's picking up the axe? It's
Right.
you,
It's me. Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
when you look at the long, there's a conversation, the
So
debate that,
so
go ahead.
so it really all boil that going back to your comment on egalitarianism and this equals Pharisees um,
Mhm,
kind of simplistic oversimplification.
mhm,
Um, it plays into what kind of where we're going with this whole Odysseus um,
mhm,
thought process, because um, we have to we have to say, okay, so if once we have identified that men are the ones to pick up the axe, um, and they're picking up the axe in the context of protecting it as a protector and a nurturer of a family, there's all of a sudden we have a why,
Yep.
right?
There's a moral imperative attached to a
There's a
man defending his family. When a woman defends herself,
yep,
we call it rising to the occasion.
yep,
Or when a woman, there's always an underdog story of a woman coming to take care of things like this, right? But when a man does it, it's duty,
yes, yep,
right? So
and duty requ- implies um, a duty in a moment. Re- the a duty that happens in a moment, but that requires a constant capability, right? There's not we're not saying, and this kind of goes back to again, why train, why have all this equipment? Well, it's I don't know when the day will come when I need to be called upon to be that protector, that provider, right? In the capacity of violence, but I know that being unprepared in that department would be catastrophic, right? And so
it would be morally condemning of
morally,
you.
it would be morally right. It'd be morally wrong to know that I it. So going
You're
back,
onto
what's
it.
that?
Go, go, go.
What's
Keep
yeah?
going.
What's the line of it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it? Very simple, but
Hmm.
we've all heard that before. It kind of is what we're talking about here. The but we're putting on the twist of saying not only do I need it and not have it, but I must have it. Like it is not it's a non-negotiable. At least it is in my book, right? As uh, and to say that you don't need it and that you would just call the police or whatever is a child's argument. Um, but that moral, you really are nailed down when you have any sort of dependent, and uh, being that women are the weaker sex, we really have you count married in that doesn't mean when we say dependence, your wife is a dependent in that when it comes to dealing out when the day comes to deal out violence, your wife is depending on you to be the one to do that. She's not, it's not just the kid, it's not just having kids.
Yeah.
And so this moral, and I think so like when you frame it in the way of, okay, I have a moral obligation now to be capable to protect my family. um, what does that imply? All of a sudden that implies more than just guns. It implies physical fitness. It implies a certain mental fitness, right? Of a certain sobriety of spirit. um, it implies a certain a certain emotional preparedness, um, and a certain hardening of one's whole self to be able to rise up to the occasion. Um, it reminds me of a story. I was at a friend's house, and I won't say the name, but this guy's it was we were playing. I was maybe I was in my early teens, and there was a small bird. We found a small bird that had died or was in its death throes, kind of flopping around outside. And they call their dad in. My friend's dad comes out, and very safe to say that this guy was overall a very soft man, not you know kind of lived in his socks all day as a computer programmer. And um, he saw that he needed to put this bird out of its misery, so he gets a shovel and smashes the bird, and then he starts crying. And I was like, I was really puzzling for me to be like, okay, well, this needed to be done. We don't, we can feel bad for the bird, but he was like sobbing, he was like emotionally distraught that he had to like kill this bird. And I was just kind of sitting there like, this doesn't feel right. Like I understand being sad about this, but like it was like he was bawling tears. And it was kind of, as I grew up, that kind of stuck with me, and I was like, okay, well, you don't want to go to the opposite extreme of being some cold, heartless human, right? Where you're like, I will kill things for fun. That's not what I'm saying. But being able to have uh, uh, when I talk about that, like an emotional preparedness, where you've said, okay, this is my duty. Should the need arise, I have I've steeled my will to deal with any threat that I come across. I want to be as capable of dealing with it as I can, so that those who I'm responsible for don't have to suffer, right? Um,
So
so
that they will not suffer.
so that they will not suffer. Yeah,
Yeah. To protect them from suffering.
yeah.
In
As
that sense, yeah.
in that sense, um, and so in that we kind of have come to a why. Now, here's we've answered the why of a family man, right? Um, a more nuanced why is, why would a single man, an unattached single man, why would he? What is his why? And an interesting thing is, I think that there is no one is truly single, right? We all have parents, um, we all have family, and if not family, friends, and if not friends, neighbors, right? And so there's still the same thought process still flows. It's just sometimes can be more distant, right? If you say, well, I'm not really close with any family, and I have few friends, well, you have a community and a and a neighborhood at large that still relies on you a as a man to be capable of dealing with threats. And it sounds, I think when you say something like that, it sounds so like animalistic, barbarian tribe, African jungle kind of mentality of like, like, um, but again, we've run into situations, especially in the, like, we all have run into situations in the past couple of years where, you know, I I live in northern Idaho, right? And during the 2020 riots, they were going the well, truckloads of, like, I think it was like 4 or 5 busloads of protesters were going to come in and wreak havoc on the city, do the whole smash and grab, burn. They wanted to do everything that they were doing, and it was one of the few towns in the U.S. where they were met with armed resistance on every rooftop of every small family-owned business were 10 to 15 guys with rifles. And what happened? They parked in the Walmart parking lot, stood there for 20 minutes cowering, and then got back in the buses and left and went back to where they came from. And it's really an interesting little moment, because we all have this idea of, um, okay, bump in the night, very easy, straightforward sense of, we're protecting, providing, defending against violent threat. Um, we'll have the idea of being alone, concealed carrying at a gas station, and the guy comes in and is trying to hold up the place, right? Classic little mental thought case. But it gets more complicated when you say, um, my friend's furniture store in downtown is an hour away from being burned to the ground. And am I capable of helping him not lose his entire livelihood in the last 30 years of his life? And that is a much more, um, that's not something that a lot of us have thought about. Maybe some of us have, but being able to answer that call it's a much that's a jump ahead
Yeah,
of.
instead of saying it's not something that many of us have thought about, I think that's a sign that we've come this far.
It's yes,
It's a
mhm,
sign that we've come this far. Instead of it being a
it
Daniel
is.
Defense ad that's taken off from the Super Bowl because it's too I don't care. But the theme of the ad was a bump in the night. Instead of being that, we have matured enough as a gun culture to start asking the next level of questions. And so
Yeah.
this is where I'm optimistic about gun
Hmm.
culture in that you can if you want to go out there and find ugliness or whatever it is you want, drama, you can find it. There's
Yep.
plenty of it. If you
Yep.
want to go out there, if you're and if that's all you see in gun culture, that's a you problem. That's
Yep.
definitely a you problem, and from my
Yep.
perspective at least. It's
Yeah.
like if only
I,
if everything that you see is negative,
it's that's totally on you.
it,
Yeah.
there is good to be found. And
There is
and
100%, and it's beyond. Um, and when we say gun culture, I really, because I kind of something I've noticed that is that the gun culture is wrapped up into. Um, Often there's crossover in gun culture, and then a culture of preparedness, and then also a culture of a community-based self-sustainability mindset, and all of those things kind of all meld together and basically saying, okay, uh, mitigating threat, right? As a role as a protector and provider, our job is to mitigate when the threat is not imminent. The rest of our time is spent mitigating the threat, right? And so, in
I mean,
answering what,
imagine if every small town in Minnesota on the Rum River had a small hydroelectric generator. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
but and it
right,
was self-maintained and built. I mean, yeah, I mean that's a bit of a that is a bit. Trust me, I know the Rum River can't support that many hydroelectric dams, but you get my
but
point. Of
I
like,
mean, there's the Mississippi. I mean,
it can
it's
it can carry a bunch. I mean, there is value to be added there.
there's there's something to be said about what if our power grid looked like every neighborhood ran its own little power facility, you know? It'd
Yep.
be very interesting.
Or had
Um,
the ability to scale up and scale down.
Scale up and scale. Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
A little and even in little things, and I think that's where it starts with like again when you say the maturing of gun culture, like we've moved. There's this movement now with like organized community comms is something that I'm seeing a lot of talk about. Like it's important. People are realizing it's important to be able to talk to your neighbors. Um, that's a very that's a I would yeah, it's a maturing of beyond the gun into that greater why, um, of saying, okay, if we're here to mitigate and prepare and uh, uh, equip ourselves against threat, whatever those threats are. Um, the threat that your power is shut off, and this sounds like such a funny thing to say, but the threat that your power it goes down is so much more likely than the fact that then you will need to go climb up on a building and snipe, you know, BLM off in downtown, right? And
Very,
even
very,
then,
yep.
and then even then, you're probably not even going to need to do that. And so and that sounds like to the guys who are out on the flat range all the time, that sounds almost like, well, what, you don't believe in being trained? I'm like, no, but I think that you should, maybe, if you live out west, it's a lot more important that you know what the fire drill is for forest fire, or if you live in the Midwest, like what happens when the blizzard rolls through. And so um, and how are you going to take care of your neighbors, and how are they taking care of you? Like that's a way more powerful end goal to have than. And do you know your neighbors, and are they willing, are they cool people, are they capable, right? and
Very much
and
so. Yeah.
how many times have you had them over for dinner, and how much do you trust them? And these are these are the bigger questions that kind of are swirling around this Odyssean kind of idea of, I have my house and I own it and I protect it and I'm kind of the king of this household. Um, but if all that Odysseus did was master his sword skills, he would not have much to run back home to. You know what I mean? Like he was he was he had his vineyards and his sheep and his wife and his servants and all this to look forward to. But if he was just this one singular focused person, um, it would lead to quite a shallow existence and a shallow why.
Yeah, well, we see that playing out. We've seen that play out with people in the military where they are. We've seen it's not an uncommon thing, and I believe that there's a bit of a trend that's changing. That the military has, especially special operations, and this is like my background, so I guess I'll speak from it. I am by no means unique in saying that being in the world of special operations is difficult on relationships. Same thing with the private contracting world. You're gone a lot. You've got this very important thing coming up all the time. It's really
Yeah.
easy to say, "Honey, I can't make." Honey, I don't have, or dear, or whatever it is, like your relationship, and going to your wife and saying, or even not even telling her this, telling yourself that I don't have time and emotional energy to address the problem of the blank because I
Hmm.
have a deployment in front of me or I have a training cycle in front of me. People's
Yep.
lives depend on me. It's not so simple to say that people reject their families in order to have the military
Oh no.
life, but it does happen, and it happens free all the time where I think Nathan Spearing's a really good example of this, where he said, he came from he came from the military, and he was like, "It my family is more important than my job," and he made
Hmm.
some sacrifices, and he's done his work. But even beyond that, this is that scenario is it's been played out in films, it's been played out in movies, it's been played out in video games, it's been played out in stories and books and whatever. What about giving up the farm and your sense of peace and your family to be an activist? Congratulations, it's the same thing. You've accomplished the same task.
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about like a left-wing activist or a right-wing activist or whatever, or a pundit, but what
Yeah.
happens if it like think about it that way? You're so involved in the gun activism
But
side that you lose your family, not because of your extremism or whatever, but because
just
of the time. Like they
you're
believe you, they
yep.
believe what you're arguing for. You don't lose your family and your home because
Yeah.
they think you're radicalized or whatever, but rather,
No. Just a lack of investment in the time needed.
mhm,
You know.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's
It's
a
a it's very true. And then we really have to ask ourselves, well, I personally believe that the world has changed in the home and in the home first. And so when you get really down to it, if you really want to change the world, you change it at home, and then you change it in yourself, then you change it in your home, and then you change it in your community at large. And it really is, and that goes for everything. I'm talking guns, your kids' education, your taxes, the things that don't even look to look to it. These things change over time. You know, I think a lot of times we get caught up in people will get caught up in thinking that some grandiose change will come and sweep through. And yes, those moments happen in history where you can look back and see, okay, a big revolution happened, and then all of a sudden these sweeping changes happen. But culturally, things need to change as well, otherwise it'll quickly just revert back. So massive cultural changes happen as well. And I think um, we've seen it in the last 60 years. um, the world has changed massively in that time frame, and it's going to change again massively in the next 60 years. It's just a matter of who, you know we see a very ugly society is going down this ugly path where people who have no why, what all this conversation we've had of being having a dependent, a family that depends on you. Well, if men reject having a family, or reject the idea that they are responsible to their community at large, and they live very selfishly for themselves, um, what they do with their time and their efforts and their talent is very sad to see. I mean, that's how we have guys who just are content to be, you know, virgins at home on their video gaming until they're in their 40s, and so it, a very shallow, hollow core of what they should have been, and it really kind of boils back to, for men, and I guess women, but really for men, a willingness to sacrifice is necessary to have for any of this, because why else would we spend? I mean, look at the gun side. Just take the gun. We'll keep it in the gun example, but like, why would I go spend it? Assuming that I didn't enjoy this a lot, right? Why would I go spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours, many weekends to hone a skill that I may not need, right? Outside, there has to be something motivating it um, beyond, some. Obviously, it's a fun thing to do, but um, you're not gonna. There truly is some sacrifice that you put into it if you really are going to take it seriously, and um, it same thing goes for any other thing in life. If you are are not rooted in a something beyond just yourself, I think it's hard to really put in the effort for meaningful
Which,
change. What are your thoughts?
well, there's two things. One of them, it kind of returns to, I think, something we brought up in the first part, was that need is not a really good sense of justification. Like the need of, well, you might
Yeah.
need, why do you need that skill? Wrong way of
Yes.
thinking.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't,
You're that.
I don't,
I see what you're saying. I see what
you
you're
know,
saying.
I don't. It's
Yeah.
not. We're
I see
not.
what you're saying.
That's why. Well, no, I'm not. It's not a
Yeah. No.
criticize of it.
No.
But
No.
it's to say
No.
that need is never a really good source of imperative, because once the
Yep.
imperative is gone, once the need is gone, there goes the imperative. Ergo, the
Imperative.
activism problem of like,
Yes.
okay, we need to stop. We need to end. Let's use an example. Like, we need to end the infringement of the Second Amendment. Okay.
Hmm.
Well, if you are an activist and you're dedicated your life to the activism for the Second Amendment, there's value to be had there. But the question rises, what will you do then when you win?
Right.
Right? Like, and this
Yep.
is a problem that America especially has dealt with in regards to the fusion of civil rights and the kind of Leninist version of Marxism, which is, well, we're just going to constantly have revolution until
Yep.
I'm in power and then no more.
Hmm.
And that's just the it's a bit of a caricature, I understand, but it creates this problem of, okay, so you created an organization which has the purpose of fighting against whatever injustice. What progress have you made? Oh, we've made all this progress, but there's so much more to do. I understand there's more work, but when will you be done?
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and the and the answer is never.
Well,
This
you
is
always
a
look. You always look at activists, and the activists are never the ones who. They're always. It's always. It's never like the. At least on when you see like the crowds of of activists rioting or protesting, you don't see. I think my video just went out. Um, we will
sometimes it
forge
comes
on.
back.
We will forge on. I believe it's my camera.
Oh,
Um, we we run into. Oh, okay, so when you see these activists never are like the happily. They're the ones who have like their entire life in order, and like they're like happily living their lives, you know, trundling along. They're the ones who are kind of like lost sheep in the world. It seems like they don't.
Yeah, I think
I'm always puzzled. I'm always puzzled by that. Where how do
I'm not necessarily puzzled anymore. I think it's but
they're
I
just
but
losers? In a way, like it's simplified. Like they're just passionate, as well-meaning as they are. They're kind of just lost in their, like you said, like what are you fighting for? Okay, great, but like at the end of it, what are you gonna do with yourself? And if the answer is, well, I don't know, then we really don't have they don't have a real why. Like if you or I were to go on some, you know, armed crusade or of sorts, you and I both know, like, okay, I am going out to do something I would much rather not be doing. I have a life to live, and I'm going to go home at the end of this and continue living the life I was living, right? Um, but if you just have,
I think I follow. I think
yeah,
I got a little bit distracted by Crusade. Sorry.
oh, sorry, say the c word. Um, no, but uh, I mean, the Crusades are. We could crack Crusades open. Crusades are kind of in a whole nother thing where there's certain similarities to that idea of an Odysseus, but more political bent. But um, the going back to the greater why, that question of, okay, so we've answered that, um, and now it comes down to, I would say, just balancing it out with your life. Like if we have this duty, right, to be a we have this duty to be a protector and a provider, and that entails kind of this all-encompassing capability, and part of that capability is the gun, and we allocate time to it. Uh, I would say just that we don't go too far in one direction and only focus on the gun, because the it is fun. I mean, straight up, it's a fun thing to train and do, and it's a lot less fun to um, put that time and care into all the other aspects of the things that we're supposed to provide and protect, right?
I'm not sure if it is less fun, to be honest. I've enjoyed learning how to garden recently,
Dude,
and
I just
and,
started a garden.
and I've
Got
enjoyed
back
learning.
into it.
You know, the guy or sorry, not the guy, Jake Knight over at Grid Base is helping me learn how to use a software defined radio like I'm a child,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, that's neat. And now
Hmm.
and this is where I think that this is why I value your opinion on this one, and why I enjoyed having I'm enjoying having you on the show is because there is, in the sense of some of the stuff that you've put out in the past, there's always this tone that you present that that in the sense the homesteading lifestyle, if you want to use that as a phrase, because I mean that's all buzzwords anyway.
Yep.
Uh, but in a sense, it's a justification in its own right. Like, no, 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 no. I'm not homesteading so I can survive the apocalypse. I'm homesteading because I want to homestead. Because like
Yes.
that's it's kind of a good thing. Like
It is a good and a noble thing to pursue in and of itself, and that makes it worth doing. Um,
y- enjoy, yeah, taking time to enjoy building a home,
yeah.
decorating that home with your life and building it out and focusing on these things and I appreciated that from your post and from the, you know, from the post from a long time ago, and how I think of it this way, and I saw this. What I saw out of it, and what I see in you in this sense is doing the right thing in regards to pursuing a good life, and I mean a good life, not a happy life, not a fun life, but a good life. Like, is it
A good
can be a genuine pursuit. Like I desire to
a
do
joy.
what is good.
I would say that it can be a joyful pursuit. You
Sure,
can the pursuit of duty begets joy.
that's good to hear. That's a really strong statement. The pursuit of duty begets joy. Very well. I think I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna title that.
I mean that I can't when we're doing what we know we're supposed to be doing, and we know that we're answering our why, that there is a peace and a joy that comes from that that is indescribable. And
I think
I,
that's one of the major failings that I adopted as a child is that I always perceived duty to be laborious. Like if it's
no,
fun, you're not doing it right.
yeah, no, and I think that's the big, and maybe that's just our fallen state as humans, right? We have a fallen nature, and the we always tend to gravitate towards the selfish thing first, right? And then it takes an act of the will to say no. uh, I'm I'm going to rise up out of what my selfish nature inclined me to at first, and I'm going to rise up against that and push towards a noble or higher goal outside of myself. That
I think
in
that's
that
one.
that's
Go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I think that's one thing that people miss often when they talk about delayed gratification is that delayed gratification is so oftentimes described as this thing where you have to forego the candy bar in order to be healthy in 70 years.
Hmm.
And it's this idea of like, you got to be miserable now so you're happy later. And it's like, no, dude. No, 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 no. That's wrong.
No,
That is
no,
wrong.
you're giving up
No.
you're giving up a lesser good now for a greater good
But
later.
my eye is my aim is on that greater good. I am not
Yes.
sitting here going, I'm going to be. It's
Yep.
the
If all you focus about it, if all you focus on is that you lost a candy bar,
it's
and that
asceticism.
you didn't gain health, right? If that is all that you focused on, then yeah, of course it's going to be miserable. I mean, that's why people who I believe there's I remember hearing about this. I can't quote studies or anything, but people who truly change their overall habits are the ones who tend to hold their weight loss when they change their day-to-day habits and adopt a whole new lifestyle versus the ones who just followed their 100-day or 60-day program, and they laboriously ate through what their you know dietitian told them to eat, and they lost the same weight, but then they end up gaining it back because they didn't adopt the spirit behind it.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
and for
it's the same
yeah, and I
it's the
mean,
same thing
I'll
with
even say it from my own life, and I can't say this from years and years of looking back, but I'll tell you this one, and it's like it's gonna be hard. Um, when it comes to abusing alcohol, depending on how you look at it and how you think about it and what your view on it is, I can go months without having anything to drink.
hmm
But if it's for the wrong reasons, as soon as that timeline is up, then I'm right back to my demons.
right.
And it's been the hardest. It has been one of the hardest things for me is to look at that and go, there's something that I believe about alcohol that is wrong because because I treat it wrongly.
Mm,
And and when it comes to, like, you're talking about the habits thing, you're talking about the health, with health and fitness and weight loss and being in shape. And when I think about going to the gym as something that I just have to do, I stop going effectively. But when it's something that I have something to aim at, hey, look, I want to maintain these standards. I want to set this standard. I want to be better at this. Then I start finding ways to make time for it. When I think about alcohol as something that, oh, well, I just need to not do it for, I need to not have anything to drink for a while and then I'll be good. The answer is no. But
mm.
and the hard thing is that I sometimes you need to pull away from it to start figuring out how to change your mindset. That's tricky, but
It
it
is.
can be done. And that's where I'm at right now, is that I for years I've been trying to figure out, and not figure out, but I've been for years in ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. It's been hard to admit, but it is true that when it comes to alcohol, I have held beliefs that are not correct.
Yeah. It
And
there's.
I've tried to
Mhm.
export the responsibility of that change onto other things.
Mm, interesting. Yeah. Well, the I think you're on to something in identifying that the the proper being able to properly look at something and put it in its proper place is kind of first and foremost the step, and then there's just the habit, right? Then we're humans, we're all creatures of habit. So then it's a saying, okay, well, if I have a habit in whatever it is, and I tend to look at this thing because what is a habit but just a use or a viewing of something as in either a good or a bad light. We have good habits, we have bad habits. And then if you are saying, okay, well, I look at this, if you're looking at, I have a friend who reached out to me and uh, had uh, a porn addiction, and he was reaching out with, how do I get away from this? Like, it's like this thing that I am always fighting with, like on, off, and you really, what I don't, I'm not, obviously, I'm not uh, some wise sage, but what I told him was, like you have to look at it and put it in its proper place. And once you view it as what it truly is, not putting it on a pedestal of like, for me, I used to be a big gamer, like big into gaming, where it was like, I mean, I was putting uh, an embarrassing amount of hours into it a week. And then I kind of woke up one day and I was like, I have to put this into its proper place. What I've done is I've elevated it into a place in my mind where it's not it's not in the right slot. It's not in the right slot, and I'm not using it as what it is. It's supposed to be recreation in my fun time, right? Not in this all-encompassing um, obsession, right? And as guys, I think that's a very common struggle that we all run into is um, when we start using things like alcohol, drugs, pornography, gaming, those are the escapes when we're not looking at our duty.
Yeah, they're a cheap substitute for having a sense of purpose, which is
Yeah.
only made harder because it seems like we're having a hard time figuring out what that is. And for some people it's small and some people it's large, but it's, I think it's something that we have to face it for what it is, and that you exist in this world where having a sense of purpose and direction and meaning and duty is not easy to achieve. In fact, maybe you will just not be given it. And that's the
Yeah.
way the world
Well,
that, but however, the alternative is worse. You, it is up to you, which means it's up to you.
yeah.
So
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, I approach this all from a faith-based perspective where ultimately all that we do is oriented towards an eternal end. So
Hmm.
everything that we do, like that line in Gladiator, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Um, it's very true. So you know, I adopt duty now. I faithfully fulfill my duties and obligations that God has given me in this life, and um, you know, we we live out our life in a way that um, we would want to live it in eternity. And I, you know, I'm sitting here pondering what you said, um, and you know, I would say there's there's a there's a a way that I would encourage you in that finding the place with the right view with the alcohol. I don't know. It's not a struggle that I've had, but I've come close a couple times with it, and it typically is is when I have let balance, like life has become unbalanced, and the thoughts are like all over the place, and it typically is when like for me it's when I'm restless, or like un I'm not tired at the end of the day, right? And you're like the it's almost like an anxiety of spirit where you're like, I have this like swirling um the swirling thoughts, and like the drink was there as like a way to help calm those, at least for me it was. um
It changes.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing. um my my wife's family, it is a running problem in her family, and they've all had to go stone cold on it because they're just like, it's it's just not something. It's like that. It's the 10,000 volt pole that you just don't touch for them. But it's an interesting thing. I've always pondered it as
Different people, man.
because different people, man, like and that's kind of the beauty of humanity is we're all so different and unique, and we all have our own little things that we fight with. And um yeah,
Ah,
it's interesting. I know that ultimately we will, you know, as long as we are pursuing what we know our duty is, um, and that is going to change a little bit for everyone given their state in life. But um, if the pursuit of duty begets that joy and that peace, especially for men, like it,
yes. Yeah.
we're absolutely wired that way.
I would
So
agree. Well, let's wrap up part 2 then. Let's
yeah,
call it a day. Let's
yeah,
sit down.
for sure.
All right. Well, Luke, where do people find you? And what do you have? Do you have any final closing thoughts?
Final closing thoughts? No, I would say just uh, be sober, be watchful, and I say that in a sobriety of spirit, and pursue your duty in life. Really sit down, like Forrest said in part one. It might be helpful to write down a list of what your whys are, what your lines in the sand are, and make sure you guys go out and get your heart rate up and touch some grass every day. And life is good. You can find me at Southpaw Luca across all the social platforms, and I will be there, and we'll chat it up with anyone who wants to listen.
All right. Well, Luke, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for being a part of this, and I look forward to having our next conversation. Maybe we'll get into a little bit of Thomas Aquinas. Uh,
I'm down. I will get in
exactly.
Thomas Aquinas anytime. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone brought up a term recently on the local side on presuppositionalism, and I was like, oh gosh, time for me to crack open another book again and be like,
Oh yeah, I'd have to brush up on that as well,
but it's a
for
good
sure.
conversation. So I
It
think it's,
is.
there are good things to
It
be
is.
had, and there's good conversations to be had. And this is, if you're at it, your outlook on life is doom and gloom. I want to invite you to like a slightly more
No, go. Yeah,
directed
for
future.
sure.
So, well, that if that's and let's call it a close. Let's call it a day.
Yeah.
Then this has been part 2 of episode 95 with Luke Brown, also known as Southpaw Luke of the Redacted Culture Cast. If you want to support the show, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. That's where you're going to find our back end discussions and conversations about some of the things that go on in the show, some of the conversations that we have here on the show, as well as an opportunity to kind of flesh out ideas and, as a result, have some influence over where we're going next. So that's redactedculture.locals.com. You can find us there. You can support the show, keep us running, as well as keep our development into gun culture going steady. Other than that, keep your hatchet sharp and your powder dry, and praise the Lord, for he is good.